Pretend to be my wife for them, says Millionaire. She stops pretending and they go to bed. Marina Sterling arrived in Aspen Creek like someone abandoning the last vestiges of a life that had crumbled. In the back seat of the Vauxhall Corsa 2008 that creaked with every mountain curve was all that remained of her dreams. 2 suitcases with crumpled clothes, an old laptop where she kept stories no one wanted to publish, and the bitterness of someone who had lost the battle before even beginning to fight for real. The dismissal from the magazine where she worked as a freelance writer came by email on a rainy Friday in March. Budget cuts, the editor's cold message read. But Marina knew it wasn't just that. She knew her articles on contemporary British literature didn't sell as well as the pieces about digital influencers that the new team preferred. She knew that at 32 she was being considered outdated in a profession that idolized youth and likes. The eviction from her apartment in Greenwich Village was merely the coup de grace. 3 months of unpaid rent, an impatient landlord, and she lacked the courage to ask for help from her retired parents who barely managed to support their own home in Brighton. She packed her books, donated the furniture that wouldn't fit in the car, and headed inland with no fixed destination, only with the vague memory that her Aunt Eleanor had mentioned Aspen Creek was in need of people to work during the peak winter season. But the Corsa didn't even get close to the train station. It was at the entrance to the town, on a steep curve surrounded by pine trees swaying in the cold March wind, that the car simply stopped. The engine coughed twice and died like a sigh of relief from someone who could finally rest. Marina tried to start it 3 more times before accepting the obvious. She was alone, penniless, jobless, and now without transport, in a town she barely knew. She picked up her phone to call a tow truck, but the screen showed only a cruel truth: no signal. Of course there was no signal, because when life decides to knock us down, it makes sure to be thorough. Marina got out of the car, walked to the nearest highway patrol booth, and discovered that even miracles have operating hours. The booth was closed, a sign informing that they would reopen at 2 in the afternoon. It was only 11 in the morning. She returned to the car, sat in the driver's seat, and for the first time in months, she didn't cry. There were no more tears, just a deep weariness, as if all the energy she once had to dream had evaporated along with her hopes. It was then that she heard the sound of a motorbike approaching. A blue Yamaha XTZ pulled up beside her car, and from it dismounted a man who looked like he had stepped out of a men's soap commercial, were it not for his grease-stained flannel shirt and faded jeans. Tall, dark-haired, with a 5 o'clock shadow and brown eyes that seemed to hold stories he didn't tell anyone. He must have been about 35, maybe 40. Hard to say. There was something about him that mixed youth with a premature maturity, as if he had learned too early that life isn't just made of happy moments. "Car trouble?" he asked, removing his helmet and running a hand through his slightly disheveled brown hair. Marina nodded, getting out of the car with what dignity she could still muster. "It just died right here. I was heading into town." The man approached the Corsa, opened the hood without asking permission, and began to examine the engine with the expertise of someone who had seen it thousands of times. His hands were firm, steady, but careful, hands that knew how to fix broken things. "Fuel pump problem," he diagnosed after a few minutes. "It's not serious, but it will need replacing. I can take the car to my garage and fix it for you." "How much would that cost?" Marina asked, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "About £300 more or less, parts and labour." £300. Marina did the math mentally. She had £240 in her wallet, which was all that remained of her bank account after paying for petrol to get there. There was no credit card available, no savings account, nothing. I don't have that money right now," she admitted, hating every word that came out of her mouth. The man looked at her for a few seconds, not with pity, but with something that seemed like genuine understanding, as if he himself had been in situations where £200 made the difference between having transport or being on foot. "Well, you can leave the car at the garage and pay when you get the money," he said simply. "It's no problem." Marina stared at him, suspicious. "What if I can't pay? What if I just disappear and never come back?" He shrugged. Then I'll be stuck with a 2008 Corsa that's worth less than the repair. Doesn't sound like a great deal for me. There was something in his voice that conveyed a strange tranquility, as if money wasn't really a concern. Marina found it odd but didn't question it. Good people still existed in the world, and she needed to believe that at that moment. All right then, but I want you to know that I will pay. I just need a few days to find a job here in town. Don't worry about that now. My name is Gabriel. Gabriel Forrester. And you? Marina Sterling. Gabriel nodded, as if committing the name to memory, and went to get a rope from his motorbike to tow the Corsa to the garage. The town of Aspen Creek stretched down, the hillside, with its European-style houses and tree-lined streets that looked like a romantic movie set. Marina had always dreamed of visiting the town, but she never imagined she would arrive there as a refugee from her own life. The mechanic's garage was on a side street downtown, between a bakery that exuded the smell of freshly baked bread and a souvenir shop that sold woolly hats for tourists. It was a small but organized space, with 3 cars parked outside and tools arranged with surgical precision on metal workbenches. Gabriel worked alone to tow the Corsa there, refusing Marina's help with a gentleness she wasn't used to receiving. "Do you need somewhere to stay?" he asked, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Not yet. I was going to look for a cheap guest house or hostel." Gabriel was silent for a moment, as if making an internal decision. Finally, he pointed in a direction up the hill. "There's a family home up on Hydrangea Lane that rents rooms to people who are just starting out in town. Mrs. Eleanor is an acquaintance of mine. If I call her and tell her you're a good person, she'll charge you less." "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Gabriel looked at her with those brown eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, don't they? And because Aspen Creek is a small town. We help each other out here." Marina felt a pang in her chest. It had been a long time since someone had offered help, without asking for anything in return. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her as if she were worthy of kindness. "Thank you, Gabriel, truly. No need to—" "No. Thank me. Tomorrow I'll start working on your car. It should be ready by Wednesday." He took a business card from a drawer in the workbench and handed it to her. "Forrester's Garage, General Mechanics," it read in simple letters, along with a phone number. Marina took the card and put it in her bag, along with the other fragments of her new reality. A kind mechanic, an unknown town, a broken car that perfectly symbolized the state of her life. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely lost. Gabriel accompanied her to Mrs. Eleanor's house, an elderly lady in her 60s, with grey hair tied in a bun, who wore floral aprons and treated guests as if they were temporary children. The house was old, made of moss-green painted wood, with a veranda facing the street and a garden full of hydrangeas that gave the street its name. "Gabriel called me, dear. £50 a night, breakfast included," Mrs. Eleanor said, leading Marina to a small but cosy room on the second floor. £50. Marina did the math again. With the money she had, she could stay there for 4 days. 4 days. To find work, get money to pay Gabriel and reorganize her life. It was a short time, but it was a start. Gabriel said goodbye at the door of the house, with a discreet wave and a promise to keep Marina informed about the repair's progress. Marina went up to her room, sat on the single bed covered by a crochet quilt, and finally allowed herself to cry. But they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, as if, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The next morning, Marina woke, up to the smell of coffee and sweet bread wafting from Mrs. Eleanor's kitchen. She went down for breakfast and found other guests at the table, a young man who worked as a tour guide, a woman who was a cook in one of the village restaurants, and a retired gentleman who had come to Aspen Creek for medical treatment, each with their own story, each rebuilding their life in some way. "Aspen Creek needs people to work in hotels and restaurants," Mrs. Eleanor commented, serving coffee to Marina. "With the winter festival approaching, there are always openings for those who aren't lazy." Marina nodded, mentally already making a list of places to look for employment. She wasn't too proud to work as a waitress, receptionist, or anything that paid enough for her to support herself while she decided what to do with the rest of her life. After breakfast, She walked to the town centre, dropping off CVs at guest houses, restaurants, craft shops, anywhere that might need staff. Most people were kind, promising to get in touch if something came up, but Marina knew that was the kind of promise that rarely materialized. In the late afternoon, tired and with aching feet from having walked the entire town, she passed by Gabriel's garage. He was working under a white Fiat Uno, only his legs visible beneath the car. "Gabriel?" she called. He slid out from under the car, his face smudged with grease, but with a genuine smile. "Marina, how was your first day in town?" "Productive. I left my CV at about 15 places. Something will turn up." Gabriel stood up, wiped his hands on his overalls, and looked at her with interest. "What did you do before you came here?" "I worked as a freelance writer. I wrote articles for magazines, some short stories. Nothing too exciting." "Short stories, you're a writer." Marina laughed bitterly. "I was, or I thought I was. Life proved to me that maybe I wasn't as good at it as I imagined." Gabriel was silent for a moment, as if processing this information. "Did you bring anything you wrote?" "Why?" "Curiosity. I've never met a real writer." Marina smiled for the first time since arriving in town. "A real writer is someone who publishes and sells books. I just wrote stories nobody wanted to read. Even so, I'd like to read something. Of yours, if you don't mind." There was something in his voice that went beyond polite curiosity, as if he genuinely cared about her as a person, not just as a client in financial difficulty. Marina found it strange, but it was a good kind of strange, as if it had been a long time since someone had shown real interest in her life and her dreams. "I can bring some stories tomorrow if you want." "Perfect. And about your car, it should be ready tomorrow afternoon. The part arrived faster than I expected." Marina nodded, thanked him, and walked back to Mrs. Eleanor's house. On the way, she stopped at a simple diner and bought a sweet bun and a coffee with milk for dinner. Saving every penny, calculating every expense, living with the mathematical precision of someone who had no margin for error. That night, sitting on Mrs. Eleanor's veranda, Marina opened her laptop and read some of the stories she had written in recent years. Stories about ordinary people in extraordinary situations, about lost and found loves, about people who needed to restart their lives from scratch. Stories that, she now realized, had much more to do with her own experience than she had previously admitted. She chose 3 stories she considered her best works, saved them in a separate folder, and for the first time in months felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. Not hope that life would go back to how it was, but hope that perhaps it could be something different, something better. Gabriel had appeared in her life as an answer to prayers she didn't even know she was making. A kind stranger who decided to help without asking for anything in return, in a town where she knew no one. Marina didn't believe in destiny, but she was beginning to believe in coincidences that save lives at the exact moment they most need saving. The next morning, she woke up determined to find work. She couldn't rely on Gabriel's kindness forever, and Mrs. Eleanor needed to receive the rent for the room. Marina visited the places where she had left her CV the day before and finally received a positive response. The Tuscan Villa Inn needed someone to work at reception on weekends and as a chambermaid during the week. The salary wasn't high, but it included some meals and would be enough to cover her basic expenses while she got organized. Marina accepted immediately. In the afternoon, she went to Gabriel's garage to pick up her car and deliver the stories she had promised. He was finishing the work on the Corsa, checking the last details with the concentration of a surgeon. "Done," he said, wiping his hands and handing the keys to Marina. "It'll run like new." Marina started the car, and the engine responded with a smoothness she hadn't heard in months. Gabriel had done more than a simple repair. He had restored dignity to the vehicle and, in a way, to her too. "About the payment," she began. "Did you find work?" "I did. At the Tuscan Villa Inn. Can I pay part now and the rest at the end of the month when I get my first salary?" Gabriel nodded. "No rush. And the stories, did you bring them?" Marina handed him a folder with the 3 printed stories. Gabriel put the folder in a drawer on the workbench as if it were a treasure that needed to be protected. "I'll read them tonight. Thank you for sharing this with me." There was something in his voice that made Marina feel special, as if her words had value, as if her dreams were worthy of attention. It had been a long time since anyone had made her feel that way. They said goodbye with a handshake that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, and Marina drove back to Mrs. Eleanor's house with the strange feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Gabriel wasn't just a kind mechanic. There was something about him that piqued her curiosity, something that went beyond his skill with engines and his willingness to help strangers. But Marina had learned not to have expectations about people she barely knew. Life had already shattered many of her romantic fantasies. For now, she was satisfied to have found work, to have her car running, and to have met someone who treated her with kindness in an unfamiliar town. It was enough, at least for now. Marina's story was just beginning, and she didn't yet know that her arrival in Aspen Creek hadn't been the end of a journey, but the beginning of something much bigger than she could imagine. Marina's first 2 weeks at the Tuscan Villa Inn passed in a blur of activities she had never imagined doing: changing sheets, cleaning bathrooms, organizing rooms, answering the phone, smiling at tourists who complained about everything from the shower water temperature to the birdsong in the morning. It was exhausting, but there was something liberating about working with her hands, about having concrete tasks that started and finished on the same day, unlike the stories she wrote and rewrote without ever feeling completely satisfied. More importantly, with each passing day she was able to pay her bills. The salary wasn't high, but it covered the rent for her room at Mrs. Eleanor's house, basic meals, and there was still enough left over for her to gradually pay off the car repair to Gabriel. Gabriel. She thought about him more than she cared to admit. Not just because of the financial debt, but because he had become a constant presence in her new routine. Every week she would stop by the garage to pay a portion of what she owed, and always found excuses to stay a little longer, talking about trivial things. How work was, if she had adapted to the town, if she needed anything. He had read the stories she brought and returned the folder with handwritten comments in the margins. Intelligent, sensitive comments that showed he had not only read the stories, but had understood the emotional nuances Marina had tried to convey. This impressed her more than she was willing to admit. It was rare to find people who understood literature in that way, especially in a small inland town. "You should send these stories to publishers," he said one Thursday afternoon, when Marina stopped by the garage to make her weekly payment. "I've tried dozens of times. No one was interested." Gabriel stopped organizing his tools and looked at her directly. "Maybe you were sending them to the wrong people." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes it's not that our work isn't good. It's that we're offering it to people who can't see the value in what we do." There was something in the way he said that, which made Marina feel he wasn't just talking about literature, as if he personally knew the experience of having his work underestimated or misunderstood. "And you know about publishers?" she asked, curious. Gabriel hesitated for a few seconds, as if deciding how much of the truth he could reveal. "I read a lot, and I have some contacts who might help." "What kind of contacts?" "People in the publishing industry. I can show them your stories, if you let me." Marina studied him carefully. There was something strange about the way he spoke of contacts in the publishing industry. Small-town mechanics usually didn't frequent those circles, but she decided not to question it. If Gabriel knew people who could help her, why refuse? "Of course, but I don't want you to feel obligated to—" "I don't feel obligated to anything, Marina. I do this because I think you have talent, and talent deserves to be recognized." The simplicity with which he said it touched her deeply. It had been years since someone had shown such confidence in her work. Marina left the garage that afternoon with a strange feeling in her chest, a mixture of hope and something more she wasn't ready to name yet. The following Saturday, a busy day at the inn due to the arrival of weekend tourists, Marina was at the reception when she recognized a familiar voice coming from the car park. It was Gabriel, talking to the inn owner, Mr. Robert, about something related to his wife's car. Marina tried to concentrate on her work, but couldn't stop watching Gabriel through the window. He was wearing the same clothes as always: jeans, flannel shirt, work boots. But there was something in the way he moved, how he gestured, that caught her attention, a natural elegance that contrasted with the simplicity of his clothes. "Gabriel is a very interesting young man," commented Mrs. Lucy, the inn manager, approaching the reception desk. "He arrived in town about 3 years ago, set up his garage, and never caused any trouble. Hard-working, honest, respectful, but very reserved. No one really knows where he came from." Marina feigned disinterest, but every word from the manager increased her curiosity about Gabriel. "Is he from around here?" "No. He came from London, from what I heard, but he never talks about his life there. And mind you, there have been a few young ladies interested in him, but Gabriel keeps everyone at a distance, until you showed up." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Lucy smiled mischievously. "I've never seen him talk so much to anyone as he talks to you. Every week he asks how you are if you need anything. I think someone has piqued the interest of our mysterious mechanic." Marina felt her face flush. "It's nothing like that. I owe him money, that's all." "Of course, dear. And I'm the Queen of England." That night, Marina went to dinner at the Woodland Eatery, one of the few places in Aspen Creek where she could afford a decent meal without breaking her budget. It was a simple establishment, frequented more by locals than tourists, with homemade food and a cozy atmosphere. She was finishing her kung pao chicken when Gabriel entered the restaurant. He saw her, hesitated for a moment, and then approached her table. "May I sit?" he asked. "Of course." Gabriel ordered a set meal and a beer, and they spent some time talking about trivial matters. But Marina sensed a tension in the air, as if both were avoiding discussing what they really wanted to talk about. "About your stories," Gabriel finally said. "I spoke with someone who works at a publishing house in London. She wants to read your material." Marina almost choked on her soda. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but she wants to meet you in person. You might have to go to London for a meeting." "I don't have money to travel right now. We'll sort that out later. The important thing is that someone is interested in your work." Marina looked at him with a mix of admiration and suspicion. "Gabriel, who are you?" "What do you mean?" "A small-town mechanic doesn't have contacts at publishing houses in London, doesn't know editors who set up meetings with unknown writers. That's not normal." Gabriel took a sip of his beer, carefully choosing his words. "I had a different life before I came here. I met some people in the cultural field when I lived in London." "What kind of life?" Gabriel was silent for almost a minute, as if fighting an internal battle about how much of the truth he could reveal. "I worked with companies. Administrative area. Nothing very interesting." Marina knew he was omitting important information, but she didn't press. Everyone had a right to their own secrets, especially when it came to a past that the person clearly preferred to leave behind. "Thank you for trying to help me," she said. "Regardless of whether it works out or not, it's the first time in years that someone has believed in my work." Gabriel looked at her intensely. "Your work is good, Marina, very good, and you deserve for people to recognize that." There was something in his voice that went beyond professional praise, an intimacy, a connection that made Marina's heart race without her being able to control it. They finished dinner talking about books, movies, music. Marina discovered that Gabriel had sophisticated tastes and surprising knowledge of art and culture, much more than would be normal for someone who had spent the last few years working as a mechanic in a small town. When they left the restaurant, Gabriel offered her a ride home to Mrs. Eleanor's house. Marina accepted, and during the short journey they remained silent, each lost in thoughts they didn't know how to verbalize. "Marina," Gabriel said when they arrived at the house, "can I ask you a personal question?" "You can." "Are you happy here, in Aspen Creek, working at the inn, living this simple life?" Marina thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I'm happy. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not completely unhappy, and that's progress." Gabriel nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Thank you for dinner," Marina said, getting off the motorbike. "Thank you for the company." Marina entered Mrs. Eleanor's house with a racing heart and a confused mind. Something was happening between her and Gabriel, something that went beyond gratitude for the car repair or professional help. But there were also mysteries she couldn't decipher, gaps in his story that made her uncomfortable. The following week, Marina received a call that would change everything. It was from Claudia Miller, an editor at Westminster Press, one of London's leading independent publishers. She wanted to schedule a meeting with Marina to discuss the possible publication of a short story collection. "Gabriel Forrester sent me your material," Claudia explained. "I read the 3 stories and was very impressed. You have a rare sensitivity, an ability to build complex characters in just a few pages. We want to talk to you about a project." Marina could barely believe what she was hearing. Years of rejection, of editors who didn't even bother to reply to her emails, and now one of London's most respected publishers wanted to meet with her. "May I ask how you know Gabriel?" Marina asked, trying to sound casual. "Gabriel, he's a family acquaintance. He always had good taste in literature." There was something evasive in Claudia's answer, but Marina didn't press. The important thing was that her doors were opening after being closed for so long. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday in London. Gabriel offered to lend her money for the trip, but Marina refused. She managed to get an advance on some daily wages at the inn and asked for a day off to travel. On Thursday evening, the eve of the trip, Marina stopped by the garage to tell Gabriel about the meeting. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's been so long since I had a real opportunity." "Everything will be fine," Gabriel said. "Claudia is a serious person. If she scheduled the meeting, it's because she has genuine interest in your work." "How do you know her, Gabriel? Really?" Gabriel stopped working and looked at her directly. For a moment, Marina thought he would finally tell the truth about his past, but he just smiled and said, "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're getting the chance you deserve." Marina left the garage more curious than ever about who Gabriel really was, but also more anxious to discover if her professional life would finally take a different turn. The trip to London was a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Marina woke up at 5 in the morning, took the 7 o'clock bus and arrived in the capital at 11. Westminster Press was in Greenwich Village, ironically very close to the apartment where she had lived before losing everything. Claudia Miller was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and an intellectual energy that intimidated and inspired at the same time. The office was small but organized, with shelves full of books and a partial view of the street. "Marina, finally," Claudia said, shaking her hand warmly. "Your stories are truly impressive. It's been a long time since I've read contemporary British fiction of this quality." The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. Claudia explained that she wanted to publish a collection of 10 of Marina's short stories, but she needed her to write 7 more stories to complete the book. The deadline was 6 months. The advance was modest but sufficient for Marina to dedicate herself fully to writing for a few months. "We just have one issue," Claudia said at the end of the meeting. "Gabriel asked us not to mention his name as an intermediary in this negotiation. Apparently, he prefers to maintain discretion about his involvement." "Why?" "I don't know. Perhaps you should ask him." Marina signed the preliminary contracts, received the advance, and left the publishing house in shock. Her life had completely changed in a matter of hours. She would be a published writer. She would have a book with her name on the cover. Her dreams were coming true, but along with the joy, her curiosity about Gabriel grew. Who was he to secure a meeting with a respected publisher? Why did he ask for discretion about his involvement? And why was a clearly cultured and well-connected man living as a mechanic in a small town? On the bus back to Aspen Creek, Marina made a decision. She would discover the truth about Gabriel Forrester, even if it meant risking their friendship, or whatever was developing between them. She arrived in town in the late afternoon, went straight to the garage, and found Gabriel closing up for the day. "How was the meeting?" he asked, genuinely anxious. "Perfect. I'm going to publish a book, Gabriel, a real book." Gabriel smiled, and Marina saw genuine joy in his eyes, as if her success was important to him in a way that went beyond simple friendship. "I'm so happy for you," he said. "You deserve this." "Gabriel, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course. Who are you? Really?" Gabriel was silent for a long moment, studying Marina's face as if making an irreversible decision. "It's a complicated story," he finally said. "I have time." Gabriel locked the garage, and they walked to a nearby square. They sat on a bench under a tree, and for the first time since they had met, Marina felt that Gabriel was about to let down his guard and reveal who he truly was. "My full name is Gabriel Forrester Whiteman," he began. "My mother is British, my father was American. They met when she was doing her master's in business administration in the United States." Marina looked at him, confused. Whiteman wasn't a common surname in Britain. "I grew up splitting time between London and Boston. I studied administration, did an MBA, worked for some multinational companies. I had a comfortable life." "Had?" Gabriel sighed deeply. 3 years ago, I was vice president of a business consulting firm. I earned well, traveled the world, had an apartment in Kensington, an imported car. Everything you'd expect from a successful executive. What happened? I fell in love with the wrong person." Gabriel stopped speaking, as if needing to gather courage to continue. "She was married, the daughter of one of the owners of the company where I worked. Things got complicated, very complicated. When the affair was discovered, it wasn't just my job I lost. It was my reputation, my connections, my entire social life." Marina felt a knot in her stomach. Gabriel had been the lover of a married woman. That explained a lot about his reserved nature, his need to restart his life in a place where no one knew him. "And you decided to come here?" "I needed to disappear for a while. Aspen Creek had always been a special place for my family. We used to come here for holidays when I was a child. When everything fell apart, it was the only place I could think of to start over." "But why a mechanic? With your background, you could work for any company." Gabriel laughed bitterly. "You don't understand how the corporate world works, Marina. When your reputation is destroyed in that environment, you become persona non grata. No one hires you. Your name becomes synonymous with trouble." Marina was beginning to understand the situation. Gabriel wasn't just an executive who had lost his job. He was someone who had been banished from his own professional world. "So you learned mechanics?" "I always liked working with my hands. My grandfather had a garage when I was a boy. I spent a few holidays helping him. When I arrived here, that's what I had left." "And the contacts at the publishing house?" Gabriel hesitated before answering. "My mother has known Claudia for years. She has a corporate communications company, works with several publishers. I asked her to intercede for you, but without mentioning my name." "Why without mentioning your name?" "Because I don't want my past to complicate things for you. My mother knows everyone in the publishing world, but I prefer to keep my distance from that world for now." Marina processed the information slowly. Gabriel was a fallen from grace, executive, someone who had lost everything because of a badly resolved love affair. This explained his culture, his education, his contacts. But it also revealed an emotional fragility she hadn't noticed before. "Do you still love her?" Marina asked, surprising herself with the question. Gabriel looked her directly in the eyes. "No, I don't love her. I don't think I ever truly loved her. It was more of an obsession, a destructive passion. I learned the difference." They were silent for a few minutes, each processing the weight of the revelations. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Marina finally said. "Thank you for not judging me. Everyone deserves a second chance. Isn't that what you told me when we first met?" Gabriel smiled for the first time since the beginning of the conversation. "You are a very special person, Marina Sterling." "You too, Gabriel Forrester Whiteman." That night, Marina returned to Mrs. Eleanor's house with her head buzzing with thoughts. Gabriel had revealed himself to be a much more complex man than she had imagined. Not just the kind mechanic who had helped her, but someone with a painful past, with emotional wounds that had not yet fully healed. But there was also an honesty in the way he told his story that touched her deeply. Gabriel had not tried to play the victim or minimize his mistakes. He had taken responsibility for the choices he had made and the consequences he had faced. Marina was beginning to understand that perhaps they had more in common than she thought. Both had lost the life they had. Both had needed to start over from scratch. Both were trying to discover who they really were when everything they knew about themselves had been turned upside down. And both were discovering that sometimes losing everything can be the beginning of finding something much better. Marina's life in Aspen Creek was about to take turns she had never imagined, And Gabriel would be much more than just the mechanic who had fixed her car. He would be the man who would help fix her soul. The 2 months following the signing of the publishing contract were the most productive of Marina's life. She had resigned from the Tuscan Villa Inn and was fully dedicated to writing the 7 stories needed to complete the book. The advance from the publisher was enough to cover her basic expenses, and for the first time in years, she could focus solely on what she truly loved to do. Mrs. Eleanor had given Marina a corner of the house veranda as a makeshift office. It was a small, cozy space with a view of the mountains and the silence necessary for creation. Marina woke up at 6 in the morning, had coffee with Mrs. Eleanor, and spent the entire mornings writing, stopping only for lunch and an afternoon walk around town. Gabriel had become an essential part of this new routine. Every day around 5 in the afternoon, when he closed his garage, he would stop by Mrs. Eleanor's house to see how Marina's workday had been. It wasn't a formal or planned visit. He simply appeared, as if he needed to make sure she was well, that the stories were flowing, that she hadn't given up on her dreams again. "How was today?" he would ask, sitting on the veranda next to the small makeshift office. "Finished another story," Marina would reply, saving the file on her laptop and stretching in the plastic chair that had become her creative throne. "What's this one about?" Marina had discovered that Gabriel was an excellent first reader. He had the sensitivity to understand the emotional subtleties of her stories and enough intelligence to suggest improvements without sounding pedantic or intrusive. More importantly, he took her work seriously, treating each story as if it were a literary treasure that deserved attention and care. "It's about a woman who returns to her hometown after 20 years away," Marina explained. "She thinks nothing has changed, but discovers that the person who changed the most was herself." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds autobiographical." "Maybe a little. I didn't return to my hometown, but I came to a town I didn't know, and I'm discovering that the person I thought I was might never have truly existed." "What do you mean?" Marina closed her laptop and turned completely to Gabriel. These late afternoon conversations had become her favorite part of the day, when they could talk not just about literature but about life, about dreams, about the revelations that emerge when you stop pretending you know who you are. "I always defined myself as a frustrated writer who worked other jobs to survive. But maybe I was just someone who liked to write and was afraid to find out if I was good at it or not. And now I'm discovering that I am good, that I have real talent, that my problem wasn't a lack of skill, it was a lack of opportunity and an excess of fear." Gabriel smiled in that way that made Marina's heart race uncontrollably. "Fear is a complicated thing. We think it's protecting us, but it's actually stopping us from living." "You speak like someone who knows the subject." "I do. I spent the last 3 years afraid to go back to being who I was before. Afraid that people would discover my past. Afraid to fall in love again and mess everything up again." Marina felt her heart pound. It was the first time Gabriel had mentioned the word love since they had become close. "And are you still afraid?" Gabriel looked her directly in the eyes, with an intensity that made Marina momentarily forget how to breathe. "Of some things, yes. But not all." There was something in the air at that moment, a tension that both felt, but neither knew how to verbalize. Marina was sure that Gabriel was about to say something important, something that would change the nature of their relationship, when his phone rang. Gabriel answered reluctantly, and Marina immediately noticed that something had changed in his expression. His face hardened, his voice became tense, and he moved a few steps away to continue the conversation privately. "No, Mum, I already told you I don't want to know about it," Marina heard him say. "I don't care what the board decided. That's not my problem anymore. I chose to stay here, and you have to respect that decision." Marina pretended to be organizing her papers, but she was paying attention to every word of the conversation. There was something in Gabriel's voice that she hadn't heard before, a harshness, a coldness that contrasted completely with the gentle man she knew. "Listen, Mum," Gabriel continued, "I've rebuilt my life here. I have a garage, I have friends, I have reasons to stay. I'm not going back to London just because the company is having problems." Gabriel ended the call abruptly and returned to where Marina was, trying to regain his relaxed expression from before. But it was too late. Marina had noticed the change, and now she was curious about this mysterious conversation. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Everything. My mother sometimes worries about the life I've chosen here." Marina knew there was something more behind that call, but she decided not to press. Gabriel had already shared a lot about his past, and she respected the fact that some things were still private for him. But in the following weeks, the calls started to become more frequent. Gabriel received calls during work at the garage, during walks they took together around town, during dinners that had become routine on weekends, and they were always tense conversations, full of words Marina couldn't fully decipher, but that clearly left Gabriel disturbed. Board meeting, strategic decisions, falling shares, need for stabilization. Words that made no sense in the context of a small-town mechanic, but that Gabriel heard with worrying familiarity. Marina was beginning to suspect that the story Gabriel had told about his past was not complete. There were gaps, inconsistencies, details that didn't fit perfectly. But she was also discovering that she had fallen in love with him, and when you fall in love, it's tempting to ignore the red flags that reason insists on waving. The passion had arrived gradually, disguised as friendship and gratitude. First, Marina had felt grateful that Gabriel had helped her when she needed it most. Then she had developed admiration for his intelligence and sensitivity. After that, she had started to long for their daily meetings, to miss him when he wasn't around, to find herself thinking about him in the most unexpected moments. Gabriel seemed to be going through the same process. His visits had become longer, their conversations more intimate, his glances more intense. He had started to find excuses to touch her, a touch on the arm when he made a joke, a hand on her back when she passed him, a hug that lasted a few seconds longer than would be considered merely friendly. It was a dangerous game they were both playing, because neither had verbalized what they were feeling, but both knew they were moving towards something inevitable. The tension reached its boiling point on a Friday night, when Marina was at the garage helping Gabriel organize some parts that had arrived from London. It was closing time. The town was quiet, and they were alone in the intimate setting of the garage. "Marina," Gabriel said suddenly, stopping his tool organizing and turning to her. "What?" "I wanted to tell you something." Marina felt her heart race. There was something in Gabriel's voice that indicated he was about to cross a line of no return. I've fallen in love with you." The words came out simple, direct, without romantic flourishes or elaborate declarations. Gabriel had said it like someone admitting a truth they could no longer hide, regardless of the consequences. Marina felt all the defenses she had built over the past few years crumble at once. She knew she had been in love, with Gabriel for weeks, but hearing him say he felt the same made all reality around them seem to change color. "Gabriel, I know it's complicated," he continued. "I know you're still rebuilding your life. I know I have a confusing past. I know it might not be the ideal time. But I needed to tell you. I couldn't pretend it was just friendship anymore." Marina approached him, put her hands on his face, and said the only thing that made sense at that moment. "I've fallen in love with you too." Gabriel kissed her as if he had waited, his whole life for that moment. It was an intense kiss, charged with all the accumulated tension of the past few weeks, all the passion they had both tried to repress, all the emotional connection they had gradually built. When they parted, they were breathless and smiling like teenagers who had just discovered what it's like to be in love. "And now?" Marina asked. "Now we see where this goes," Gabriel replied, hugging her tightly. The next 2 months were the most intense of Marina's life. She and Gabriel had officially become a couple, something the entire town of Aspen Creek seemed to have predicted long before they themselves admitted their feelings. Mrs. Eleanor smiled with maternal approval every time Gabriel appeared to pick up Marina. Mrs. Lucy from the inn made mischievous comments about how Marina looked prettier and happier lately, and even Mr. Robert from the bakery had started setting aside special breads for the most beautiful couple in town. Marina had finished her book of short stories and sent it to Claudia, who responded enthusiastically about the quality of the material. The release was scheduled for 4 months later, and Marina was already dreaming of book signings, newspaper reviews, and perhaps even invitations to give literary talks. Gabriel had become not only her boyfriend, but her best friend, her confidant, her first reader. He had read all the stories in the book and offered suggestions that significantly improved the final quality of the work. Marina had never had a partner who was genuinely interested in her professional dreams, who encouraged her to be better, who treated her ambitions as if they were important to him too. But a shadow was growing over their happiness, and that shadow took the form of the phone calls Gabriel kept receiving. The calls were becoming more frequent and more urgent. Gabriel tried to answer them away from Marina, but she occasionally overheard fragments of conversations that left her increasingly uneasy. "I can't come back now," Gabriel heard say one Tuesday morning. "I have commitments here. No, it's not just the garage. It's complicated to explain over the phone." Or, "Mum, you have to understand that I've built a new life here. It's not fair for you to expect me to abandon everything just because the company is having difficulties." Marina was beginning to realize that the difficulties of the company Gabriel had worked for were more serious than he had initially revealed. And she began to suspect that his involvement with this company was also deeper than a simple executive position. The suspicion turned into certainty one Thursday afternoon, when Gabriel forgot his phone at the garage and Marina was there helping him organize the business's accounting. The phone rang, and without thinking much, Marina answered. "Hello, Gabriel's garage." "Who is this?" asked a feminine voice, elegant, with an accent that mixed London and a clearly expensive education. "I'm Marina, Gabriel's girlfriend. He went out to get some parts, but he'll be back in half an hour. Do you want to leave a message?" There was a prolonged pause on the other end of the line. "Girlfriend," the woman repeated, as if the word were a completely new concept. "Gabriel has a girlfriend?" "Yes, he does. And you are?" "Isabella Whiteman. His mother." Marina felt her stomach drop. Gabriel's mother didn't know he was dating. This was strange, considering they had been together for 2 months, and Gabriel seemed to talk to his mother regularly. "Mrs. Whiteman, it's good to finally meet you. Gabriel talks about you a lot." "Does he?" Isabella's voice was laden with an irony that Marina couldn't decipher. "And how long have you two been dating?" "2 months. We met when I arrived in town and—" "I see," Isabella interrupted. "Marina, could you ask Gabriel to call me urgently? It's about a very important family matter." "Of course, I'll give him the message." "And Marina." "Yes? Perhaps it would be a good idea for you two to talk about some things Gabriel hasn't told you yet, about who he really is." The call ended, and Marina stood looking at the phone with a growing sense of unease in her stomach. What hadn't Gabriel told her yet? And why did his mother seem so surprised to discover he had a girlfriend? When Gabriel returned, Marina delivered the message about his mother's call, but didn't mention the strange conversation she had had with Isabella. She decided to wait and see if Gabriel would comment on anything himself. Gabriel called his mother right away, and again moved away to have the conversation privately. But this time, Marina deliberately paid attention to every word she could hear. "Mum, that's none of your business," Gabriel was saying, clearly irritated. "My personal life has nothing to do with the company's problems. No, she doesn't know anything, and I intend to keep it that way, because I don't want her involved in this mess." Marina felt her blood run cold. Gabriel was deliberately hiding something from her, something related to the company problems he constantly mentioned. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Gabriel talking about board meetings, strategic decisions, and the need to stabilize the corporate image, words that definitely made no sense in the context of a former executive who had lost his job because of an extramarital affair. When Gabriel returned, Marina made a decision. "Gabriel, we need to talk." "About what?" "About who you really are." Gabriel turned pale. "Marina, I already told you." "You told me part of the truth, but not the whole truth." Gabriel sat down in a chair in the garage, ran his hands through his hair and was silent for almost 2 minutes. Marina waited patiently, but she was prepared for a revelation that would change everything between them. "You remember when I said I worked for a consulting firm?" Gabriel finally began. I remember. I didn't work for the company. My family owns the company. Marina felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. What do you mean? Whiteman and Associates is a family holding company. My mother founded the company 30 years ago when she separated from my father. Today we control consulting firms, publishing houses, event production companies, some technology startups. It's a group that generates about £800 million a year. Marina had to sit down. £800 million a year. Gabriel wasn't just a former executive. He was the heir to a business empire. And you left all that to be a mechanic? I left because I couldn't stand that life anymore. The pressures, the social obligations, the internal political games of the company, and because the scandal with the married woman had destroyed my reputation in London's business circles. What married woman, Gabriel? You never told me who she was. Gabriel sighed deeply. Isabella Maxwell, daughter of the owner of the country's second-largest communications company. She was married to Edward Maxwell Jr., son of the founder of the Maxwell Group. Our affair wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a scandal that involved two of London's largest business families. Marina was trying to process the information. Gabriel wasn't just rich. He was part of a business elite she only knew from economic newspapers. And now they want you to come back? The company is going through a crisis. Some investments went wrong. There were problems with a tax audit. And the board is pressuring my mother for me to reassume my position on the board of directors. Why? Because they believe my presence will convey stability to investors, that it will show the family is united, that the company has guaranteed continuity for the next generation. Marina was beginning to understand the magnitude of the problem. Gabriel wasn't just a man who had fled his past. He was someone who carried the weight of responsibilities that affected hundreds of employees, millions of pounds in investments, and the future of a family business. And you, what do you want to do? Gabriel looked at her with an intensity that made Marina's heart race. I want to stay here. I want to continue with the garage. I want to continue my life with you. I don't want to go back to that world. But what if the company goes bankrupt? What if people lose their jobs because of your decision? It won't go bankrupt. My mother is a competent executive. She can solve the problems without me. Marina wasn't sure if Gabriel was being realistic or just stubborn. But one thing was clear. They had reached a point in their relationship where secrets and half-truths were beginning to take their toll. Gabriel, I need time to process all this. Marina, please don't let this change what we have. I don't know if this changes it or not. I just know you hid something very important from me, and now I don't know what to believe anymore. Marina left the garage that afternoon with her head buzzing with doubts. Gabriel was a completely different man than she had imagined, not just because of the money, but because of the responsibilities and pressures he carried, and especially because of his willingness to lie by omission about fundamental aspects of who he was. That night, at Mrs. Eleanor's house, Marina wondered if she really knew the man she had fallen in love with, and she also wondered if the Gabriel she loved, the kind and sensitive mechanic from a small town, was real or just a character he had created to escape a reality he didn't want to face. Marina's life was about to get much more complicated, and Gabriel would have to decide if he wanted to fight for the love they had built or return to the world he had left behind. But there was something else Marina didn't know yet. Something that would make this whole situation infinitely more complex. The publishing house that had published her book was part of Gabriel's family's business conglomerate. And that was no coincidence. Marina spent 3 days avoiding Gabriel. 3 days pretending she was too busy with the final revision of her book to have time to talk to him. 3 days trying to separate the man she had fallen in love with from the reality of who he really was. Heir to a business empire she only knew from economic news. Gabriel tried to find her several times. He appeared at Mrs. Eleanor's house with flowers, left sweet notes under her bedroom door, sent messages asking for just one chance to talk. But Marina needed time to process everything she had discovered, and especially to understand if her feelings for Gabriel were real or if she had fallen in love with a person who didn't exist. On the third day, a rainy Friday in late autumn, Marina received a call that would completely change her perspective on the entire situation. "Marina, this is Claudia Miller from Westminster Press." "Hi, Claudia, how are you?" "Well, thank you. Listen, I need to talk to you about something delicate related to your book." Marina felt a knot in her stomach. "Is there a problem with the publication?" "Not exactly a problem, but a situation you need to be aware of. Are you aware that Westminster Press is part of the Whiteman and Associates business group?" Marina's world stopped for a few seconds. Whiteman and Associates, the name of Gabriel's family company. "What do you mean?" she managed to ask, although she already knew the answer would change everything. "Westminster Press was acquired by the Whiteman Group 2 years ago. We are part of their portfolio of communication companies. That's why when Gabriel Whiteman sent me your material, I paid special attention." Marina sat heavily on the bed in her room. Gabriel Whiteman. He hadn't even used a false name. She just hadn't made the connection, because she would never have imagined that the kind mechanic from Aspen Creek was a member of one of the country's most powerful families. "Claudia, are you telling me that my book was published because Gabriel asked you to?" "Not exactly. Your work has genuine quality, Marina, but I confess that Gabriel's recommendation made me pay attention to the material more quickly than I normally would." Marina felt a mixture of anger and humiliation take over her chest. Everything she had achieved, all the dreams that were finally coming true, were the result of Gabriel's influence. She hadn't won on her own merit. She had won because she was dating the right man. "Marina, are you there?" "I am. Claudia, could you send me a copy of the contract for me to review some clauses?" "Of course. But is there a problem?" "Perhaps. I'll analyze it and get back to you." Marina ended the call and stared at the bedroom wall for almost an hour. Everything made sense now. The ease with which Gabriel had gotten a contact at the publishing house, the speed with which Claudia had responded to the material, the exaggerated enthusiasm for stories that she knew were good, but perhaps not so extraordinary as to justify so much attention. Gabriel had manipulated the entire situation. He had used his family influence to give her an opportunity she might never have gotten on her own. And worst of all, he had done it without telling her the truth, letting Marina believe she had won on merit. That afternoon, Marina marched to Gabriel's garage with the determination of someone about to end a chapter of her life. She found him working under a Volkswagen Fox, only his legs visible beneath the car. "Gabriel, we need to talk now." He slid out from under the car, his face smudged with oil, but his eyes lit up at seeing her after 3 days. "Marina, it's good you came. Westminster Press is part of your company." Gabriel froze, still holding the screwdriver in his hand. "Marina, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you used your influence to get me a publishing contract. That all my success is artificial. That you made me believe I had won alone when in reality I was just another one of your charity projects. It wasn't like that." "How wasn't it, Gabriel?" Marina's voice was rising, laden with an anger she hadn't felt in years. "You lied about who you were, lied about how you got the contact at the publishing house. Let me believe my work had been accepted on its own merit when in fact it was accepted because you asked." Gabriel stood up, tried to approach her, but Marina recoiled. "Marina, your work is truly good. Claudia wouldn't publish anything just because I asked. She has a reputation to uphold." She herself admitted that your recommendation made a difference. It made a difference in the speed of the process, not the quality of the decision. Marina laughed bitterly. "You don't understand, do you? It doesn't matter if my work is good or not. What matters is that you took away my chance to discover that for myself. You took away my chance to win by my own achievements." Gabriel was silent for a few seconds, and Marina saw in his eyes that he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. "I just wanted to help you," he said, in an almost whispered voice. "I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask to be your personal redemption project. I didn't ask to be the way you found to feel better about yourself after the scandal in London." The words came out harsher than Marina intended, but she was too hurt to care about niceties. "It's not that, Marina. I fell in love with you. Truly." "How can you be sure? How can I be sure? Maybe you fell in love with the idea of saving someone. Maybe I fell in love with a person who doesn't exist. Gabriel tried to argue, but Marina didn't want to hear any more explanations. She left the garage with a broken heart and the certainty that everything she had experienced in recent months had been based on lies and manipulations. That night, at Mrs. Eleanor's house, Marina made a decision that would change the course of the entire story. She called Claudia and asked to cancel the publishing contract. "Marina, are you sure? Your book has the potential to be a success." "I'm sure. I don't want to publish anything that was obtained through personal favors." "But do you understand that this could harm your future chances in the publishing market? Canceling an already signed contract is not something editors look favorably upon." "I understand it's a risk I'm willing to take." Marina ended the call and for the first time in weeks felt that she had made a decision that was entirely her own, without external influence, without anyone's help. It hurt to give up the dream of having a book published, but it hurt more to know that this dream had come true for the wrong reasons. The next day, Saturday, Marina was packing her bags when Mrs. Eleanor appeared in her room. "Are you leaving, dear?" "I am. I think my time in Aspen Creek has come to an end." Mrs. Eleanor sat on the bed next to Marina and watched her fold her clothes with mechanical movements. "May I give an opinion from someone who has lived a lot and seen a lot?" Marina nodded without stopping her packing. "Sometimes we get so worried about doing things the right way that we forget to enjoy the good things that appear in our lives. Gabriel lied to me, Mrs. Eleanor, about everything. Gabriel is a complicated young man, that's true, but in recent months, seeing you two together, I've never seen him so happy, and I've never seen you as alive as you've been since you arrived here." Marina stopped folding her clothes and looked at Mrs. Eleanor. "He made me believe I had achieved my dream alone. Discovering it was all rigged. It's humiliating. Dear, do you really think a publisher would publish a bad book just because someone asked? Do you really think your work has no value?" Marina hadn't thought about it from that angle. She was so focused on the emotional betrayal Gabriel had committed that she hadn't stopped to consider that perhaps her stories really were good enough to be published. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then let me give you some advice. Believe in yourself. Regardless of how the opportunities arose, you were the one who wrote the stories. You were the one who had the talent to create characters that move people. No one can take that away from you." Mrs. Eleanor stood up, kissed Marina's forehead affectionately, and left the room, leaving her alone with her confused thoughts. Marina spent the rest of the day walking around town, trying to put her feelings in order. Aspen Creek had become her home in recent months, and the idea of leaving hurt more than she was willing to admit. But staying would mean confronting Gabriel daily, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. In the late afternoon, as she returned to Mrs. Eleanor's house, Marina saw unusual activity at Gabriel's garage. There were 2 luxury cars parked in front of the establishment, and through the window she could see several people talking in serious tones with Gabriel. Curious, Marina approached close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. "This situation cannot continue, Gabriel," said a female voice she recognized as Isabella, his mother. "The board is losing patience," a man with a deep voice spoke. "The company needs stability and your presence is fundamental," another man added. Gabriel seemed to be pressured by several people at once, and his expression was that of someone cornered. Marina hid behind a parked car and continued listening to the conversation. "Mum, I already said I don't want to go back," Gabriel said, with a firmness Marina hadn't heard in his voice since they met. "It's not a matter of wanting, son. It's a matter of responsibility. The company is undergoing a federal audit. There are suspicions of irregularities in the previous management. Your presence on the board is crucial to convey confidence to investors." "And what kind of irregularities?" Gabriel asked. "Problems with tax documentation, some contracts that are being questioned by HM Revenue and Customs. Nothing serious, but enough to make shareholders nervous." Marina felt a chill in her stomach. Gabriel wasn't just fleeing family pressures, he was fleeing serious legal problems. "Gabriel," another man said, "you have to understand that it's not just about you. There are 300 direct employees and over 1,000 indirect ones who depend on the company's stability. It's about families who will be jobless if the company goes into crisis." Marina saw Gabriel run his hands through his hair, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign of him being under extreme pressure. "How long would I have to stay?" Gabriel asked. "At least 6 months," Isabella replied. "The time needed to resolve the audit and stabilize operations." "And after that, could I come back here?" "After that, you would be free to do whatever you wanted." Gabriel was silent for almost 2 minutes, clearly wrestling with a decision that would change the course of his life. "What if I don't go?" "Gabriel, you have no choice," Isabella said, with a harshness in her voice that made Marina understand where her son's strong personality came from. "If the company goes bankrupt, you will carry that responsibility for the rest of your life." Marina emerged from her hiding place and walked quickly back to Mrs. Eleanor's house. She had just witnessed Gabriel being pressured to return to London and for the first time understood that his situation was much more complicated than she had imagined. It wasn't just about a spoiled man who had run away from home. It was someone who carried the weight of responsibilities that affected hundreds of people. Someone who was being forced to choose between his personal happiness and the well-being of many. That night, Marina couldn't sleep. She stayed on the veranda of the house, looking at the mountains under the moonlight, trying to understand what she was feeling. Anger at Gabriel for his lies, pity for him for the pressure he was facing, confusion about her own feelings, and a painful longing for the happy moments they had shared before everything became complicated. At 2 in the morning, she heard footsteps on the pavement and saw Gabriel standing outside the house, looking up at her bedroom window. He stood there for almost 15 minutes as if trying to gather the courage to ring the doorbell, before finally leaving. On Sunday morning, Marina had coffee alone because Mrs. Eleanor had left early to visit a sister in Canterbury. She was trying to decide if she should really leave town when the doorbell rang. It was Isabella Whiteman. Even without ever having seen her in person, Marina recognized her immediately. There was a natural elegance in her posture, a sophistication that showed in her expensive, discreet clothes, her impeccable haircut, the way she moved. Isabella must have been about 55, beautiful in a way that only money and genetics can provide, and she had in her eyes the same intensity Marina had learned to recognize in Gabriel. "You're Marina?" "I am. You're Gabriel's mother." "I am. Can we talk?" Marina hesitated for a moment, but curiosity overcame prudence. "Come in." Isabella entered the house and looked around with the gaze of someone evaluating the environment where her son had chosen to rebuild his life. "Coffee?" Marina offered. "Thank you." They sat in Mrs. Eleanor's simple kitchen, two women from completely different worlds, united only by the complicated figure of Gabriel. "Marina, I'm going to be direct with you because time is running out," Isabella began. "Gabriel told me you two are having difficulties in your relationship." Marina almost choked on her coffee. "He talked to you about that?" "Gabriel has always talked to me about everything. We are very close, especially since his father died." Marina didn't know Gabriel's father had passed away, another piece of information he had omitted. "Mrs. Whiteman, I don't know if it's appropriate." "Gabriel needs to go back to London," Isabella interrupted. "And it's not a whim of mine. It's a real necessity. The company is facing serious problems that could result in hundreds of layoffs if not resolved quickly." "I know. I overheard your conversation yesterday." Isabella smiled, a smile that mixed admiration and amusement. "You listened in? Interesting. Gabriel said you were curious." Marina felt her face flush. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was passing by on the street and—" "Relax, Marina. If I were in your situation, I'd also be curious about what's going on." Isabella took a sip of coffee and studied Marina carefully. "Gabriel is in love with you," she finally said. "How can you be sure?" "Because in the last 3 years since he came here, I've never seen my son talk about anyone the way he talks about you. And because yesterday he said he doesn't want to go back to London because he doesn't want to lose you." Marina felt her heart race. "He said that." "He did. And he also said that you found out about the publishing house and are angry because he used influence to help you." Marina nodded, not knowing what to say. "Can I tell you something about my son? Gabriel always had a tendency to try to solve the problems of the people he loves. When his college girlfriend was having financial difficulties to pay for her studies, he invented a non-existent scholarship to help her without hurting her pride. When his best friend was unemployed, Gabriel created a non-existent position in the company to hire the young man. That doesn't make what he did to me any less wrong. It doesn't, but it explains why he did it. Gabriel has difficulty accepting that the people he loves face difficulties when he has the power to help. Isabella stood up and walked to the kitchen window. "Marina, I need Gabriel in London. The company needs him, but he won't go unless he's sure you won't disappear from his life while he's away." "And what do you want me to do?" Isabella turned and looked directly at Marina. "I want you to go with him." Marina was sure she had misheard. "What?" "I want you to go to London as Gabriel's official girlfriend, to live with him, to support him during these difficult 6 months, to be the partner he needs to face the pressures that will arise." "Mrs. Whiteman, I can't do that. I don't belong in your world." "And who says you need to belong? Gabriel chose you, Marina. And when a man in our family chooses someone, we respect that choice." Marina was silent, trying to process the completely unexpected proposal. "What if I say no?" "Then Gabriel will probably choose to stay here and let the company go bankrupt. And he will carry that guilt for the rest of his life. And both of you will carry the weight of knowing that hundreds of families lost their livelihood because your love was more important than social responsibility." Isabella placed her coffee cup in the sink and prepared to leave. "Think about what I said, Marina. Gabriel needs to be back in London by Wednesday. If you decide to accompany him, I will come to pick you both up myself. And if I decide not to go—" Isabella stopped at the door and looked at Marina with an expression that mixed understanding and determination. "Then you will have to decide if you prefer a simple life in Aspen Creek without Gabriel or a complicated life in London with him. And you will have to decide if your feelings for my son are stronger than your wounded pride." Isabella left the house, leaving Marina alone with the most difficult decision of her life. In 3 days, she would have to choose between pride and love, between the simple life she had built and the possibility of a future she couldn't even imagine. And for the first time since she had arrived in Aspen Creek, Marina didn't know what the right answer was. Marina spent the next 2 days in a state of mental agony she hadn't experienced since the worst moments of her life in London. Isabella's proposal echoed in her mind every minute: to accompany Gabriel to London, to be his partner during the corporate crisis, to dive into a world she didn't know, to support the man who had lied to her, but who had also become the most important person in her life. On Monday, she tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. She tried to read, but couldn't concentrate. She tried to do household chores to distract her mind, but every activity made her think of Gabriel and the decision she needed to make by Wednesday. Gabriel didn't appear at Mrs. Eleanor's house during those 2 days, respecting the space Marina had asked for. But she knew he was going through the same torment, perhaps even worse, because he had to deal with family pressure and the responsibility of hundreds of jobs in addition to a broken heart. On Tuesday afternoon, Marina made a decision that surprised her. She went to Gabriel's garage. She found him organizing tools with mechanical movements, clearly trying to keep his hands busy so as not to think about what was happening in his life. When he saw her enter, Gabriel stopped everything he was doing and looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and fear. "Marina." "Gabriel." They looked at each other for a few seconds, like two fighters studying their opponent before the final battle. "I came here because I need to tell you some things," Marina said, her voice firmer than she felt inside. "I'm listening. First, you were wrong to lie to me. About who you are, about the publishing house, about how you got the contract. You were wrong to decide alone what was best for me." Gabriel lowered his head. "I know, and I apologize. Second, I was wrong to cancel the publishing contract. I was letting my wounded pride speak louder than reason." Gabriel looked up, surprised. "I called Claudia this morning and asked her to reactivate the book's publication. She agreed, provided I submit 3 additional stories in 2 months. Marina, that's great. Your stories deserve to be published. Third," Marina continued, ignoring his comment, "I spoke with your mother." Gabriel turned pale. "My mother was here?" She was, and she made me a proposal that I spent 2 days considering. Gabriel said nothing, just waited for Marina to continue. I'm going with you to London. The words came out simple, direct, but loaded with all the implications Marina had considered during her 2 days of reflection. Gabriel looked at her as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. You're going? I am, but with conditions. What conditions? Marina took a deep breath before continuing. She had thought a lot about this conversation and knew it was her only chance to establish the basis for an honest relationship between them. First condition, no more lies or omissions. If we're going to face this together, you tell me everything. About the company, about the legal problems, about the pressures you'll face. I want to be your partner, not your protégé. Agreed. Second condition, I maintain my professional independence. I will work on the stories for the book. I will look for other publishing opportunities on my own. I don't want to be supported by you or be seen as the heir's girlfriend. Agreed to that too. Third condition, if at any point I feel that our relationship isn't working or that I'm being used as an accessory to improve your image, I'll come back here. And you won't try to stop me or convince me to stay. Gabriel hesitated for a few seconds before answering. That one's harder to accept because the idea of you leaving terrifies me. But I agree. Marina felt a huge relief at having been able to verbalize all her concerns. Now she could consider the possibility of accompanying Gabriel without feeling that she was abandoning her personal dignity. And Gabriel? Yes? Fourth condition, I want you to tell me now, today, the whole truth about the company's problems. I don't want to discover anything through third parties or be caught by surprise. Gabriel closed the garage, went to the small room he used as an office, and for the next 2 hours told Marina everything he had omitted about the situation of Whiteman and Associates. The company was being investigated for fiscal irregularities that had occurred during the period Gabriel was away. They weren't serious crimes, but enough to generate distrust among investors and cause market instability. His presence on the board was essential not only to reassure shareholders, but also to provide information about operations he had coordinated before his departure. If the company goes bankrupt, it's not just about the money, Gabriel explained. There are 300 direct employees who will lose their jobs, plus the families who depend on contractors, suppliers, the entire ecosystem that has been built around the company. Marina finally understood the weight of responsibility Gabriel carried. He wasn't just a rich man who had to go home. He was someone who had the power to affect the lives of hundreds of people with his decisions. How long do you think you'll need to stay in London? My mother said 6 months, but honestly, it could be longer. It depends on how the audit goes and how long it takes to stabilize operations. And after that? Gabriel looked at her intensely. Marina, I don't know. Maybe I'll discover I like being involved with the company again. Maybe I'll discover I prefer to come back here. What I do know is that I don't want to make that decision alone. I want us to decide together what our future will be. Marina felt her heart race. Gabriel wasn't just asking her to accompany him in a temporary situation. He was asking them to build a life together, regardless of where that life would happen. All right, she finally said, let's go together. Let's see where this goes. Gabriel kissed her as if he hadn't seen her in months, instead of just 3 days. It was a kiss laden with relief, gratitude, love, and most importantly, hope that perhaps it was possible to mend what had been broken between them. On Wednesday morning, Isabella arrived in Aspen Creek driving a black BMW X5, accompanied by a driver who would travel back with Gabriel's car. Marina had packed her bags the night before, saying goodbye to Mrs. Eleanor with tears in her eyes and promises to keep in touch. I don't know when I'll be back, Marina said to the elderly woman who had become a maternal figure in her life. Come back when the time is right, Mrs. Eleanor replied, hugging her affectionately. And remember, sometimes life takes us to places we didn't plan to give us exactly what we need. The journey to London lasted 3 hours and was filled with conversations about practical logistics, where Marina and Gabriel would live, his apartment in Kensington, what her routine in the city would be like. Gabriel had arranged a co-working space for her to work on her stories, and what social events she would have to face as the official girlfriend of the Whiteman heir. There will be some social gatherings where your presence will be important, Isabella explained. Dinners with investors, charity events, some industry conferences. Nothing too complicated, but situations where you will represent Gabriel's emotional stability. Marina felt her stomach churn. I don't know if I'm good at that kind of thing. No one is born knowing, Isabella said with a reassuring smile. The important thing is to be yourself. People respect authenticity more than performance. Gabriel's apartment in Kensington was exactly what Marina had imagined. Modern, elegant, with a view of the park and decor that mixed sophistication with comfort. It was at least 5 times larger than any place she had ever lived, with a living room that could house Mrs. Eleanor's entire home. This is my world, Gabriel said, watching Marina explore the apartment. I know it's very different from what you're used to. It is different, Marina replied, looking out the 22nd floor window. But I think I can adapt. The first few days in London were a mix of adaptation and discoveries. Gabriel went back to wearing a suit every day, attending meetings that lasted for hours, dealing with pressures Marina only knew from movies. She spent her mornings writing in the co-working space he had arranged, and her afternoons exploring the city, rediscovering London through the eyes of someone who had changed completely since she last lived there. The first major test of her new life came on a Thursday, 10 days after they arrived in the city. Gabriel had to attend a dinner with international investors, and Marina's presence was crucial to demonstrate that he was emotionally stable and ready to assume long-term responsibilities in the company. Marina spent the entire afternoon choosing clothes with the help of an image consultant Isabella had hired. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. Every detail of her appearance would be analyzed by people who made decisions worth millions of pounds, based also on the confidence they had in the company's leadership. Remember, the consultant said, you don't need to impress anyone. You just need to show that you are a compatible partner for Gabriel. The dinner took place in one of the most elegant restaurants in Canary Wharf. Marina recognized some faces from the economy pages of newspapers, executives who ran multinational companies, investors who controlled pension funds. It was a completely new world for her, but Gabriel was by her side, introducing her with pride and affection that didn't seem forced. Marina is a writer, he would say to everyone they met. She's launching her first book in 2 months. Marina noticed that Gabriel didn't mention that he had met the editor through his family. He was letting people believe that she had gotten the contract on her own merit, which was technically true, even if the process had been facilitated. During dinner, Marina listened to conversations about the financial market, international investments, corporate strategies. Topics she didn't master, but which she began to understand were an essential part of Gabriel's life. He wasn't just a spoiled heir, he was a competent executive who deeply understood the family business. Your girlfriend is charming, a lady who controlled one of the country's largest investment funds commented to Gabriel. She has a naturalness that is rare in our circles. Gabriel smiled, but Marina noticed he was tense throughout the dinner, as if he was playing a role he no longer knew if he wanted to interpret. On the way back to the apartment, Marina asked, "How did you feel today?" "Strange," Gabriel admitted. 3 years ago I attended these dinners every week and thought it was normal. Today it felt like I was pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. "And who are you now?" Gabriel stopped the car at a traffic light and looked at Marina. "I'm finding out, but I know I want to be someone who doesn't have to choose between responsibility and happiness." In the following weeks, Marina began to better understand the complexity of the situation. Gabriel wasn't just facing professional problems, he was redefining his identity. The 3 years in Aspen Creek had changed him deeply, and now he needed to find a way to integrate the man he had become with the responsibilities that had always been his. Marina was also changing. The corporate world intimidated her, but she discovered she had social skills she didn't know she possessed. She could talk to influential people, network for her literary career, and most importantly, support Gabriel in ways that went beyond physical presence at events. "You help me remember who I am when I'm not in a suit," Gabriel said one night after a particularly difficult meeting with federal auditors. "And who are you?" Marina asked. "Someone," who believes that business can be done ethically, someone who cares more about people than numbers, someone who wants to build something good in the world. It was at this moment that Marina understood that Gabriel wasn't just a rich man who had fled responsibilities. He was someone who was trying to find a way to use his power and privilege to create something positive, instead of just maintaining the status quo. The turning point in the company's situation came unexpectedly through Marina. She was writing one of the additional stories for the book when she had an idea that would change everything. The story was about a family company facing a crisis of confidence, and Marina began to think about transparency, authentic communication, and how people respond to honesty, even in difficult situations. "Gabrielle," she said one night, "what if you stopped trying to hide the company's problems and started talking openly about them?" "What do you mean?" "What if instead of trying to reassure investors by saying everything is fine, you admitted there are problems, but showed exactly how you are solving them?" Gabriel looked at her with growing interest. "Continue. People respect honesty. If you publish a full report on what went wrong, what measures are being taken to correct it, and how you will prevent it from happening again, perhaps investors will have more confidence than if you keep trying to minimize everything." Gabriel was silent for a few minutes, processing the idea. That's very risky. Admitting problems publicly could make the shares plummet even further, or it could show that you are a company mature enough to take responsibility and transparent enough to deserve trust. The next morning, Gabriel presented the idea to Isabella and the board of directors. The initial reaction was horror. No one in the corporate world admits problems publicly unless absolutely necessary. But after hours of discussion, they agreed to try Marina's approach. The transparency report was published on a Thursday, with all information about the tax problems, corrective measures, and plans to prevent similar situations in the future. Gabriel gave interviews to the main economic media outlets, taking responsibility for the errors and explaining how the company was reorganizing. The reaction was surprising. Instead of punishing the company for its transparency, the market reacted positively. Shares rose 15% in 2 days. International investors praised the corporate maturity of the decision. The specialized press pointed to Whiteman and Associates as an example of how to deal with crises ethically. "It was Marina's idea," Gabriel said in an interview with the London Chronicle. "She reminded me that honesty builds trust faster than marketing." Marina saw the interview in the co-working space where she worked and felt a pride different from anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't pride at being mentioned publicly, but pride at having genuinely contributed to solving a problem that affected hundreds of families. That night, Gabriel came home with a bottle of champagne and a smile she hadn't seen since their days in Aspen Creek. "The federal audit was concluded today," he announced. "No penalties, just some recommendations for process improvement." Marina kissed him, and for the first time since they arrived in London, he seemed completely relaxed. "Does that mean you can go back to Aspen Creek?" she asked. Gabriel looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and love. "It means I can do whatever I want, that we can decide together what we want to do." "And what do you want?" Gabriel sat beside her on the sofa, took her hands, and said something Marina wasn't expecting. "I want to stay in London." Marina looked at him, surprised. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but not in the way I lived before. I want to reformulate the company, focus on projects that have a positive social impact. I want to use our influence to support other entrepreneurs, especially in the cultural area, and I want to do this with you by my side." Marina felt her eyes welling up with tears. "Gabriel." "Marina, the last 2 months have taught me that I don't have to choose between responsibility and happiness. I can have both, as long as I have the right partner." He stood up, took a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and knelt in front of Marina. "Marry me?" Marina looked at the ring, a simple and elegant solitaire, and then at the man who had entered her life when she most needed to believe that it was still possible to start over. "Gabriel, are you sure? I'm not from your world. You are my world. You are my world." Marina closed her eyes, thought about everything they had been through together. All the lies and truths, all the difficulties. and triumphs, and gave the only answer that made sense. Yes. 6 months later, Marina was sitting on the veranda of a house they had bought in Aspen Creek to spend weekends. It was a simple but charming property, with a view of the mountains and enough space for her to have an office with the view she had always dreamed of. Her book of short stories had been released and was in its 3rd edition. The reviews were mostly positive, and she had received invitations to participate in literary panels in several cities across the country. More importantly, she was working on her first novel, a story loosely based on her own experience of restarting her life in a small town. Gabriel split his time between London, where he ran the family business with a more social and transparent approach, and Aspen Creek, where he kept the mechanic's garage running on weekends as a hobby. He had discovered that he could be an executive and a mechanic at the same time, as long as he was honest about his motivations in both activities. The company had become a reference in corporate governance, and Gabriel was frequently invited to speak about authentic leadership and corporate social responsibility. The story of how he had left everything to become a mechanic and then returned with a different perspective had become a case study in business schools. "You know what I was thinking?" Gabriel said, sitting next to Marina on the veranda. "What?" "That maybe our story should become a movie." Marina laughed. "And who would play the frustrated writer who arrived in town with a broken Corsa?" "Someone beautiful and intelligent." "And who would play the mysterious mechanic?" "Someone stubborn and full of secrets." Gabriel kissed her, and Marina thought about how interesting life worked. She had come to Aspen Creek fleeing a failure and had found love. She had fallen in love with a mechanic and had discovered a businessman. She had lost one life and gained another completely different and infinitely better. "Marina," Gabriel said, suddenly serious. "What?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For coming with me to London. For helping me discover who I really want to be." Marina looked at the man who had become her husband, her partner, her greatest supporter, and thought about how wise her decision had been to believe that some people are worth forgiving, that some loves are worth fighting for, that some stories deserve a happy ending. "Thank you," she said, "for appearing in my life exactly when I most needed to discover that it was still possible to be happy." Gabriel hugged her, and they stayed there on the veranda of their house, looking at the Aspen Creek mountains in the late afternoon, knowing that they had built something rare and precious together. A love based on truth, partnership, and the courage to change when necessary. Their story had begun with a broken car on the side of the road, but it had transformed into proof that sometimes the best journeys begin exactly when we think we've reached the end of the road, and that was a story they would tell their children yet to come, to the friends they would continue to make over the years, and especially to themselves whenever they needed to remember that true love is not that which arises without difficulties, but that which grows despite them. Dear listeners, we hope Marina and Gabriel's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, overcoming, and second chances, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you most in this story. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that it is always possible to start over when we find the right people by our side. We await you in the next episode.